My dad rewrote his will to exclude me after I paid off his debts. Part 1. The background. It's funny how life works sometimes. You spend years trying to get to know someone, trying to make them proud. And then one day, something shifts. For me, that shift came when I paid off my dad's massive debt. A decision I thought would bring us closer. In fact, I thought it would fix everything. Let me back up a bit. I'm in my late 20s, and growing up, my relationship with my father was complicated, to say the least. He wasn't an abusive parent, but he was never the warm, loving dad I saw in other families. He was distant, emotionally unavailable, and often focused more on his career than on his family. Still, I loved him. He was my father after all, and there were moments, rare ones, when I felt a connection. The problem, though, was that he always seemed to push me away when I tried to get closer. When I graduated college, I had a few friends who would talk about how supportive their parents were, how their dads were there for them financially and emotionally. I didn't have that. I was on my own. And that's when the debt situation first reared its ugly head. My dad had been struggling financially for years. I didn't know the full extent until I was in my early 20s and started to realize just how bad it was. He had taken out loans, used credit cards recklessly, and even borrowed money from people I had never heard of, all to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Over the years, the debts piled up, and I started to realize how much pressure he must have been under to keep everything afloat. It wasn't until he hit rock bottom that I understood just how deep the hole was. He lost his house. The bills were stacking up. I got a call from one of his creditors one day, and when I called him to ask what was going on, he admitted that he was overwhelmed. I knew he wasn't the type to ask for help, so I made the decision to step in. It wasn't an easy decision, but I was in a better place financially. I had saved up enough to pay off most of his debts, a combination of loans, credit card bills, and back taxes. It felt like the right thing to do. If I could relieve some of his burdens, maybe we could finally have the father-daughter relationship I'd always hoped for. I didn't expect parade, but I thought my gesture would at least earn me some gratitude. Maybe even a little respect. After all, I was giving up a significant portion of my savings to do something for him. But what happened next was, well, the opposite. Instead of appreciation, I was met with a cold silence. He didn't thank me. He didn't even acknowledge what I had done for him. The only thing he said was that he was grateful it was over. But the tone of his voice felt more like a dismissal. It stung. I thought, asterisk, maybe he just needs some time to process this asterisk. But that time never came. Then, a few months later, I found out that he had completely rewritten his will. I wasn't even a footnote in it anymore. At first, I was in disbelief. After everything I had done, I had expected to at least be included in his will some recognition for stepping in and saving him. But no. Instead, the only thing I was left with was the unsettling feeling that my gesture had been seen as an obligation rather than something born out of love. I never got the chance to ask him directly what happened. We don't talk much anymore. Our interactions are minimal, cold even, and I feel like a stranger in my own father's life. Now, I'm left wondering, was my decision to pay off his debts an act of kindness? Or was it a foolish mistake that only pushed me further away from the man I hoped would be a father to me? And why, after everything, did he cut me out entirely? It's been a few years now, and the silence between us has only grown. But I still can't shake the feeling that something doesn't add up. And part of me is still searching for the answer. Part 2. The betrayal. It's hard to describe the feeling of being excluded from someone's life, especially when you've gone out of your way to help them. When I first found out that my dad had rewritten his will, I couldn't believe it. I mean, we weren't exactly close, but I thought I meant something to him. That my gesture paying off his debts would at least make a dent in his cold, distant heart. But instead, it felt like I was slapped in the face. I'll never forget the day I found out. I was sitting at home scrolling through my phone when I received an unexpected call from my aunt. She's my dad's sister, and while we're not super close either, she's always been a bit more open with me than my dad has. Hey, I'm sorry to bring this up, but I just wanted you to know that your dad recently updated his will, she said, her voice quiet, almost apologetic. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't even know how to respond. What do you mean, updated it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, I don't want to cause trouble, but you're not listed in it anymore. He's made some pretty significant changes. I felt like the room was spinning. How could this be possible? After everything I had done, after the sacrifices I made to help him out of that mess, he had erased me from his life entirely. I pressed my aunt for more details, but she didn't have much information beyond what I already knew. My dad had rewritten his will and had left me out of it. I asked if she knew why, but she didn't want to get caught in the middle of it. So that was that. The conversation ended, and I sat there in shock, with my mind racing. I remember sitting in the same spot for hours after that, trying to make sense of it. What had I done wrong? Why had my dad chosen to exclude me? I thought about the time I spent paying off his debts, the long nights I stayed up organizing paperwork, the awkward conversations with his creditors. I'd gone above and beyond, all for the hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd see me differently. Maybe he'd recognize my effort, my love, and understand that I was doing it because I wanted to help him, not out of obligation. But all that hope seemed pointless now. To him, I was nothing more than a stranger. A few days later, I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. I left a message, but he never returned it. For the next few weeks, I tried again, sending him texts and leaving voicemails, anything to get a response. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he called me back. Hey, he said, his voice cold. I heard you've been trying to reach me. Yeah, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. I need to understand why you changed your will, why I'm not included anymore. After everything I did for you, I thought we were past all this. I thought we were finally okay. There was a long pause. For a moment, I thought he had hung up on me, but then he spoke. Look, he said, sounding tired, almost dismissive. You did what you did because you felt you had to. I never asked you to pay off my debts, and frankly, I didn't want you to. I don't need your pity. I didn't want to be beholden to you. And I don't want to owe you anything, especially not in the form of a will. His words stung sharper than I could have imagined. Pity. I didn't think it was pity. I thought it was love. Dad, that's not what this was about. I protested. I did it because I wanted to help you. I thought we could move forward. You don't have to owe me anything. I just wanted to be part of your life. Is that so wrong? Maybe it is, he said flatly. Maybe you should have learned a long time ago that I don't want to be helped. I don't need you coming in and solving my problems. You don't know what I've been through or what I've sacrificed to get where I am. I've worked hard, and I don't need you looking at me like I'm some charity case. His words were harsh, but the underlying bitterness in his voice was what hurt the most. It felt like I had never mattered to him, not in any real way. The emotional wall he had always put up had turned into a fortress, and I was nothing but a casualty of it. I spent days trying to wrap my mind around it. I asked myself if I had overstepped, if I had been wrong to offer help in the first place. But I couldn't think of a single way I could have done it differently. I had acted out of genuine care, but somehow my dad saw it as an intrusion. Then, just when I thought I couldn't feel any worse, my aunt called me again. She had some news my dad had changed his will again. This time, he had named a distant cousin as the sole heir to his estate. Not only was I excluded, but it seemed like he had completely severed ties with me. I was devastated. I spent days in a fog, asking myself how things had gone so horribly wrong. I couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal. I thought of all the years I had tried to get closer to him. All the little moments when I had tried to win his approval. And now this. All my efforts had been for nothing. But what hurt the most was not the money, not the material things I had been hoping to inherit. It was the realization that my dad, the man I had spent my whole life trying to connect with, saw me as nothing more than a mistake, a failure, someone who wasn't worthy of his love or his legacy. I don't know if I'll ever get over it. Part of me still holds out hope that one day my dad will reach out and explain. But deep down, I know that's probably not going to happen. The gap between us is too wide, and I'm not sure how or if it can ever be bridged. What I've learned from all of this is painful but simple. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, you just can't change someone else's heart. And in the end, the most devastating thing isn't the money or the will, it's the realization that no matter what you do, you'll never be enough for someone who isn't capable of loving you back. Part 3. Moving on. It's been a while since that phone call with my dad, and in some ways, I've come to terms with the painful reality of what happened. The betrayal, as raw and fresh as it felt in the beginning, has started to fade. And I'm learning how to move on, though it's not as easy as just letting go. When I think back on everything, I still can't help but feel a sense of disbelief. How could someone who shared my blood, someone I thought I had finally helped in a meaningful way, just cut me out of their life so coldly? I spent so much of my time trying to understand my dad's decisions, trying to reconcile the man I wanted him to be with the reality of who he was. And yet, no matter how much I tried to explain it to myself, the truth was always there. I had been cast aside, not for any tangible reason, but simply because I had crossed an invisible line in his mind. At first, I kept hoping that one day he would come around, that something would click and he would realize what I had done for him. I waited for a text, a phone call, anything that would signal that the door to our relationship wasn't permanently closed. But as the months passed, I began to realize something important waiting for someone to change when they're not willing to do so only traps you in a cycle of pain. I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but one day, I just decided I couldn't keep carrying the weight of his rejection anymore. I had to start living my life for myself, not for the hope that he would finally acknowledge me. The truth was that I had given everything I had, emotionally and financially, to a person who wasn't ready or willing to see me for who I was. And that was okay. His asterisk choices were his, but my asterisk life was mine to reclaim. I started by focusing on myself. For the first time in years, I took a step back from trying to fix things with him. I began to rebuild my financial stability, which had taken a huge hit from paying off his debts. I threw myself into my work, took up new hobbies, and started to surround myself with people who genuinely appreciated me for who I was. The friends who had always been there, the ones who never asked anything of me but gave in return, were the ones who helped me through the tough times. I won't lie, it wasn't an easy transition. I still felt the pang of disappointment every time I thought about my dad. There were moments when I caught myself imagining him reaching out, saying he was sorry, or telling me that he regretted what he'd done. But those moments grew fewer and farther between as time passed. I realized that if I wanted to live a fulfilling life, I couldn't keep holding onto a version of my dad that didn't exist. I had to let go of the fantasy that one day he'd be the father I wanted him to be, and accept him for who he was, someone who couldn't or wouldn't offer me the love and support I had been desperately seeking. Over time, the anger started to fade. I stopped asking myself, what did I do wrong? And started focusing on what do I need now? I learned to value the relationships I had with people who were genuinely invested in me, my friends, my colleagues, even my own self-respect. I realized that the worth of my life wasn't determined by my father's approval or rejection. I could build my own legacy, one that didn't depend on someone else's acceptance. Eventually, I stopped thinking about his will altogether. What was the point? In the end, material things didn't matter. It was the emotional connection I had hoped for, the one I had worked so hard to foster, that had been stripped away. But I didn't need his validation to feel whole. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to whether or not I was included in someone's will, or even whether that person could love me in return. My worth was intrinsic, and no one could take that from me. I've also found a strange sense of freedom in letting go of my expectations. In some ways, not being in his will was the final push I needed to stop seeking approval from someone who would never offer it. It was a painful lesson, but one that ultimately taught me self-reliance. I had spent so many years hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. And once I let go of that hope, I felt lighter, freer. As for my dad, I've accepted that our relationship may never be what I wanted it to be. I still think about him from time to time, but I no longer let his absence define me. I've stopped trying to piece together why he did what he did. And I've stopped blaming myself for his choices. I've come to realize that it's not my job to fix someone else's brokenness. I can only control my own actions, my own growth, and my own happiness. I won't say that I'm completely healed. There are still moments when I feel that old ache, when I wonder what could have been. But they don't consume me anymore. I've learned to live without the approval of someone who was never capable of giving it. And in that, I've found a kind of peace. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to live without the weight of past disappointments. It means finding strength in yourself when others can't or won't offer it. It means realizing that, sometimes, the best way to honor yourself is to stop waiting for someone else's validation and start creating your own path forward. I've built a life I'm proud of. One where I am no longer defined by the actions of a man who never saw me for who I truly am. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally living for myself.